This happened in 2018. I had moved to a rental house on the outskirts of a small college town about 8 months earlier for a new job. The house sat on the end of a quiet street with only a few neighbours. Most were students who had gone home for winter break, and I was still pretty isolated and hadn't made many friends yet. For New Year's Eve, I had absolutely no plans. My co-workers had all left town to visit family or go to parties in the city. I didn't really know anybody well enough to make social plans. I'd figured I'd just have a quiet night at home and maybe watch the ball drop on TV and call it an early night. I was in my kitchen around 9 PM making myself some dinner when I heard what sounded like footsteps on the wooden deck that wrapped around the back of the house. I turned off the stove and listened, but just as I did, everything went quiet. I thought maybe it was just the old wood settling, or the cold, or maybe I'd just misheard, so I resumed cooking. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again. This time it was definitely footsteps, moving slowly across the deck towards the back door. I really wasn't expecting it, so it made my heart skip. I crept over to the window and looked through the blinds, but I couldn't see anybody. The motion sensor light hadn't even come on either, so I thought maybe I was going mad. I checked the back door, it was locked, and then went back to eating dinner, but I felt uneasy. Then, around 10:30, I decided to do a walk around the house just to make sure that everything was fine and make myself feel better. When I checked the front door, I found muddy boot prints on the welcome mat. They were fresh and there were droplets of melted snow leading right up to the door. I hadn't ordered any food packages and it was too late for mail delivery. The prints were too big to be from any female neighbours and most of the houses on the street were dark anyway. I made sure again that all the doors and windows were locked. I thought about calling my parents too to make me feel better, but I decided not to bother them. After a while, I just assumed that it was probably somebody who'd gotten lost looking for a New Year's party. I stayed up until just after midnight, watching the TV celebrations and trying to distract myself. When nothing else happened, I finally went to bed at 12:20, though I kept my bedroom door open so I could hear if anybody tried to get in through the front or the back. I woke up at 7:15 on New Year's Day feeling groggy and disorientated. Still half asleep, I shuffled to the kitchen to make some coffee, and I immediately noticed a breeze of cold air. And to my horror, I realised that the back door was slightly ajar, even though I knew I locked it the night before. I woke up immediately and my heart started pounding as I approached the door. It wasn't damaged or forced open, it was just unlocked and cracked open about an inch. I pushed it closed and turned to the deadbolt, then slowly started checking the rest of the house. In my living room, I found wet footprints on the hardwood floor leading from the back door to the hallway. They stopped right outside my bedroom door, where there was a small puddle of melted snow. Someone had walked into my house while I was sleeping and stood right outside my room. I don't know how I missed this when I woke up. I must have been way too groggy. Nothing appeared to be missing. My laptop was still on the coffee table, my TV and electronics were untouched. Even my purse with cash and credit cards was sitting where I'd left it on the kitchen counter. It seemed like whoever had been in here wasn't interested in stealing anything. It freaked me out completely, so I called the cops immediately, but they weren't much help. They came out and took a report, but they said there wasn't much that they could do without any more evidence. The officer suggested that maybe somebody had been drinking at a party and gotten confused about which house was theirs, trying the back door when the front one didn't work. But that theory didn't explain why somebody would just walk directly to my bedroom door and just stand there. The whole thing felt much creepier than a simple mistake. I stayed with a co-worker for the next few nights. From what I could tell, that person never came back, at least not that I could detect. But the fact that somebody stood outside my bedroom door while I was sleeping still gives me the chills. "8 months ago, my sister moved back to our hometown after finishing college. leaving me alone in the apartment we'd shared near the campus for the past 2 years. Both of us had talked about getting our own places since we were in our mid-20s now, but I wasn't quite ready financially. After she left though, I realised I actually enjoyed having the extra space and decided to renew the lease for another year. This happened in late October. I had just gotten back from my evening shift at the restaurant where I worked as a server, and I was exhausted from a particularly busy night. It was just after 11:30 when I walked through the door and kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch. I was maybe 20 minutes into scrolling through my phone when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Not unusual for an apartment building, but these footsteps were different somehow. Slow, like somebody was trying to be quiet, and then they stopped right outside my door. Then came 3 soft knocks. I muted the TV and listened, wondering if I'd heard correctly and who could possibly be visiting at this hour. Then the knocks came again. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a woman standing there in the hallway, probably in her 40s, wearing a dark coat. Her hair was a mess and she kept looking over her shoulder towards the stairwell. Something about her posture made me uneasy. She seemed nervous, almost frightened. I called through the door, not opening it, and asked if I could help her. The woman stepped closer and said she was sorry to bother me so late. She explained in a shaky voice that she thought somebody had been following her. She asked if she could just use my phone to call her husband, saying that her cell phone had died and she didn't want to go back to her car alone. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to help, but something felt off about the whole situation. Why hadn't she gone straight to the front office? Why my door specifically? I told her to wait a moment while I thought about it. Looking through the peephole again, I could see that she was pacing back and forth in the hallway, constantly checking behind her. She did seem genuinely distressed, and I started to feel bad for not helping immediately. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my phone and opened the door, but I stayed in the doorway rather than letting her inside. She thanked me and said that I was helping her so much. She took the phone with shaky hands, and then she dialed a number and waited. But after a minute she shook her head and said that it was going straight to voicemail, that her husband must be asleep. She handed my phone back to me and thanked me again, then hurried towards the stairwell without another word. I closed and locked my door, but something nagged me about the encounter. If she was in danger, why did she just leave? I went to my bedroom window, which faced the parking lot, and looked down to see if I could spot her leaving. Sure enough, there was somebody walking quickly across the parking lot towards a small sedan parked near the back. The woman got in and just sat there for several minutes before finally driving away. Thinking this whole thing was over, I went back to the couch and tried to relax. But at 1 AM, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard those same footsteps in the hallway again. They stopped outside my door, and this time there was no knock, just silence. I crept over to the peephole and looked out, but the hallway appeared empty. Still, I had the distinct feeling that somebody was out there, just outside my line of sight. I stood there for a few minutes listening, but I heard nothing. Eventually, I just went to bed, feeling uneasy. The next morning I woke up feeling unsettled, but tried to push the strange encounter out of my mind. I made coffee and was getting ready for work when I heard my phone buzzing. There was a text from an unknown number. The message thanked me for my help the previous night. I stared at my phone confused. I hadn't given the woman my phone number, and she had only used my phone to make a call, and my settings are set to the permanent hide caller ID setting, so how did she get my number? I didn't respond and tried to focus on getting ready for work, but the message bothered me all day. That evening I came home from work at around the same time as the night before. I was more alert this time, listening for any unusual sounds in the hallway. Everything seemed normal until about midnight when my phone began to ring from a hidden number. This went on for 3 times. Each time I ignored it, though each time I felt more uneasy. Before bed I crept over to the peephole just to check. The paranoia was really getting to me. Thankfully, nobody was in the hall, Just after 2 AM, as I was finally drifting off to sleep, a sudden banging started. It was violent and loud, aggressive pounding that seemed to shake the entire hallway. Just bang, bang, bang. Each hit was louder than the last, and I could hear the door rattling in its frame. Someone, it seemed, was trying to break down my door. I shot up in bed, completely paralysed with fear. The banging was relentless, echoing through my apartment and probably waking up half the building. Between the thunderous impacts I could hear a woman's voice screaming, but the words were muffled. The sound was primal and absolutely terrifying. I went to grab my phone, but just as suddenly as it all started, everything stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. It felt heavy and threatening. I waited in my bedroom, too scared to move, straining to hear any sound in the hallway. 5 minutes later, I worked up the courage to check the peephole. The hallway was empty, but my door was covered in scratches and dents from the assault. Soon after, the police arrived. Somebody must have called them from another apartment. They found no trace of anybody in the building, though. I still live at the same apartment, but nothing like this has ever happened again. What haunts me the most is that I never found out who that woman really was or what she wanted from me. The aggressive banging that night suggested something far more sinister than somebody simply needing help. Was she the one trying to break in, or was she running from something that followed her to my door? The questions from those 2 terrifying nights will never be answered, and I still jump every time I hear footsteps in the hallway, but I have to get on with my life. This happened to me about 6 months ago, during a late November night. I was driving home from my job at a warehouse, working the evening shift that ended at 11:30 PM. The route I usually took was mostly highways, but there was this one section, about a 7-mile stretch, that went through farmland, where the road narrowed to 2 lanes with nothing but cornfields on both sides. I'd been feeling under the weather all week, fighting off what felt like the beginning of a cold, and that night the drowsiness was hitting me harder than usual. As I entered that long stretch through the farmland, I remember checking my fuel gauge and realising I was running lower than I thought. I'd been meaning to stop for gas after work, but I completely forgot this time. The needle was hovering dangerously close to empty, and I started doing mental calculations about whether I'd make it home. And that's when my car started sputtering. At first I thought maybe I could nurse it along, but within a few hundred yards the engine began cutting out completely. I managed to coast along to the shoulder just as it died entirely. I was stranded on this dark country road with dead corn stalks rustling in the wind on both sides of me. I sat there for a moment trying to restart the engine, but it was completely dead, not even turning over. So I grabbed my phone and called for help. But of course, I barely had a bar of signal out here. I tried calling my girlfriend, but the call kept dropping. While I was fumbling with my phone, trying to find a spot with better reception, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. There was a pickup truck about a quarter-mile back, just sitting there with its headlights on. It had pulled over onto the shoulder behind me, but far enough back that I couldn't make out any details. I thought maybe they were also having car trouble, or perhaps they'd stopped to help me, but they just sat there. For nearly 10 minutes, neither of us moved. Finally, I decided to get out and wave them down for help. As soon as I opened my door and stepped out, I heard their engine start up. And as I moved towards them, instead of driving towards me, they slowly began backing up, keeping their distance. When I moved back into my car, they stopped backing up. And then when I got out again just to see what would happen, they resumed backing away. This went on for about a minute and was starting to really unnerve me. Why would somebody play games like this instead of helping or just driving away? I managed to find a spot with some signal to send a message to my girlfriend with my location, asking her to come and get me. She replied pretty much instantly, saying that she was on her way and that she'd be about 10 minutes. Then I locked my doors and waited, keeping an eye on the truck in my mirror. About 15 minutes later, I saw new headlights approaching from the direction I'd been heading, hoping it was my girlfriend. But as the vehicle got closer, I realised it was another pickup truck, and this one was approaching from the front. It slowed down as it passed my car, then made a U-turn, and parked about 50 yards ahead of me, facing my direction. Now I had trucks in front and behind, and I was starting to panic. I tried calling 911, but the call wouldn't go through with the poor signal. So I sent another message to my girlfriend, this one more urgent, telling her to hurry up. The truck behind me started moving forward slowly, while the one in front began creeping backwards. They were closing the distance, boxing me in. I had nowhere to go, my car was dead and there was nothing but ditches and cornfields either side of me on the road. Just as they were getting close enough that I could see the silhouettes of people inside both trucks, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, my girlfriend's car engine. Her headlights appeared over the hill behind the front truck, and she was driving fast. As soon as her headlights illuminated the scene, both trucks immediately accelerated. Then the one behind me sped past her in the opposite direction, while the other one in front took off down the road and disappeared into the darkness. My girlfriend pulled up beside me, and I've never been so relieved to see anybody in my life. Without saying a word, I dove into her car and locked the door behind me. We turned around and drove back the way she came. We ended up having to leave my car there overnight, and came back in the morning with a jerry can full of gas. I expected it to be trashed, but thankfully it was just as I left it, and it started up right away. I drove straight to the nearest gas station. I still need to drive that route to work, but I always make sure that my tank is full, and I keep a better eye on my surroundings. I have no idea where those trucks came from, but they must have been local. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my girlfriend hadn't shown up when she did, and honestly I'd rather not know. I'm just thankful that she did.